Out of all the Nicktoons that Nickelodeon put out in its 30-plus year history, The Loud House has to be one of the network's most interesting success stories. Created by animation veteran and total scumbag Chris Savino, The Loud House centers on Lincoln Loud, an 11-year-old boy who shares a house with his 10 sisters, as he tries to navigate the chaos that comes with living in such a large household. Premiering on May 2nd, 2016, I think it's safe to say that no one was expecting The Loud House to take off the way that it did. Given how Nickelodeon has long since become infamous for sabotaging the vast majority of its shows for not getting SpongeBob-level ratings out the gate, it was clear that it would take nothing short of a god-given miracle for a Nicktoon to last more than 2 seasons. However, against all odds, The Loud House managed to immediately garner a large fan base. Many viewers were quickly drawn in by how endearing the Loud siblings were, the relatable way it presented living in a large household, and the show's overall good-natured, if somewhat cheesy tone. The Loud House stands out as one of the few genuinely successful Nicktoons of the 2010s, with it being the only other Nicktoon not based on a pre-established property to run for more than 2 seasons, the other being Sanjay and Craig, the show with Snoop Dogg in it. Before long, the Loud House would go on to replace the Fairly Odd Parents as the network's new number 2 to SpongeBob, and finally give Viacom a reason to kick that shambling corpse of a show to the curb. Even after Chris Savino was kicked out of Nickelodeon, after his more than a decade of sexually harassing his female colleagues came to light, the Loud House would go on without him and continue to maintain a large following. Now on its 7th season, the Loud House stands as one of Nickelodeon's longest running and most successful shows. Despite its success though, the Loud House has become increasingly divisive. While it still has a ton of fans, there have been a growing number of people, ranging from former fans to those who never got the hype behind it to begin with, who have been expressing nothing but complete disdain for the show. It's to the point where, odds are, if there's a video discussing the Loud House, it probably isn't going to be singing its praises. Which begs the question, what is it about this seemingly unassuming cartoon that has left so many people divided on it? Well, I have a few theories as to why, but before that, I should probably address the question presented in this video's thumbnail. Is the Loud House overrated or overhated? And my answer to that is yes. I mean, I like it, I just don't love it like a lot of fans do, nor do I think it's anywhere near awful. I'm sorry, but if you came here expecting an impassionate rant on the Loud House one way or the other, this might not be the video for you. Allow me to elaborate. The Loud House is a pretty straightforward slice-of-life cartoon, following the day-to-day lives of the Loud family and the antics that they end up getting into. Now, I'll be the first to admit that the writing of the Loud House isn't anything groundbreaking. Most of the stories are pretty simple, and you can usually tell how exactly an episode's plot will play out, with things working out in the end and the characters usually learning a lesson along the way. But this never really bothers me, because the characters and their dynamics are so charming, and more often than not, the journey getting there is a fun enough time. Although, like most long-running shows, the first handful of episodes are pretty rough. Early on, the show treated Lincoln's sisters more like a unit he was at odds with, rather than as individual characters, and were generally more antagonistic towards each other, which contributed to the somewhat mean-spirited tone of the first season. Fortunately, the Loud House starts to find its footing around a third or so into season 1, before managing to find a pretty good rhythm by season 2. By that point, the show became more about Lincoln working alongside his sisters, rather than opposing them. While they don't always get along, and are still very much dysfunctional, there's a greater sense that the Loud siblings really do care about each other, and I think this approach to their dynamic makes their interactions far more endearing. Speaking of which, let's talk about the siblings themselves, starting with the man with a plan himself, Lincoln Loud. As far as main characters go, Lincoln is likable enough, being a good-natured, confident kid who often gets in over his head. But let's be honest, he's not the main draw of this show. While Lincoln's a perfectly fine lead, the Loud sisters are far more engaging, entertaining characters to watch, which just kind of comes with making your main character the general everyman, to contrast with the more eccentric cast. It also sounds kind of mean when you consider the plot of the movie, but I digress. While starting out pretty one note, the Loud sisters would gradually get more depth and characterization, with the show putting greater focus on them as individuals as it went on, particularly from season 2 onwards, when the show stopped centering solely around Lincoln, and it became more of an ensemble show that divided the attention between all 11 Loud Loud siblings. It's a change that I think was for the better, as it not only allowed for more opportunities to expand upon the sisters' characters, but it led to a greater variety of stories than there were previously. All 10 sisters are pretty fun characters in their own right, with my personal favorites being Luna, the cool, passionate sapphic rocker chick, and Lola, who's just an adorable ball of sass and rage. Even the ones I initially found to be flat and annoying, like Luann and Lynn, would eventually gain proper depth and end up growing on me. It's especially fun whenever an episode centers on all of the siblings as a group. These kinds of stories are filled with plenty of neat character interactions, and almost always manage to give each one their own little moment to shine. It's honestly pretty impressive how the show's able to balance so many different personalities in these episodes without feeling crowded, especially given that most of them are only 11 minutes long. One thing that I can really appreciate about the show's character writing is that there's actually a sense that the Loud siblings do retain some of the lessons that they learn, and to some extent end up growing as people. Just to name some examples, Lori gets less bossy, Lola gets less bratty, Lucy grows less aloof, Lynn is less of a fucking tool, and the family just treats each other better overall. Unlike in something like the Fairly Odd Parents, you don't really get the sense that these characters have to learn the exact same lessons over and over again. In fact, there's actually a fair amount of continuity to this show, ranging from callbacks to major status quo changes that stick throughout the series, like Lori going off to college and Lily learning to talk. I don't know, I just think it's fun when largely episodic shows are still able to maintain solid continuity and sometimes change things up in small or huge ways. Going back to the Fairly Odd Parents comparison, The Loud House admittedly does share the same issue of its comedy not being all that great. The show can be funny every now and then, with Lola always being the comedic highlight in my opinion. A lot of the humor is pretty lame and is often akin to dad jokes. However, also like the Fairly Odd Parents, the main appeal of The Loud House isn't really the comedy. It's seeing these charming interactions from this rowdy bunch of siblings and the genuine bond that they share. More often than not, the character dynamics on display are strong enough to make up for the often lackluster humor. When it comes to visuals, The Loud House looks great, the animation is fluid, the characters are expressive, and the show sports a charming comic book art style. Unfortunately, the early seasons do utilize some problematic / obnoxious 90s and 2000s tropes, like the "she's only bullying you because she likes you" trope with Lincoln and his kind of, but not really anymore, love interest Ronnie Ann, and the young boy crushing on an older woman trope with Clyde simping over Lori. Fortunately, these tropes will be gradually phased out of the show, with Lincoln and Ronnie Ann's relationship now having a more platonic, vitriolic best buds angle to it, and the show rightfully pretending that Clyde's crush on Lori was just never a thing. With all that said, The Loud House is a bit on the hit or miss side. For every good episode, there's one that's just kind of whatever, and every season does have a handful of duds in it. But when an episode works, it tends to work pretty well. Overall, I think that The Loud House is a good time. It has its faults, and doesn't quite stack up against some other currently running slice of life cartoons, but it's a perfectly enjoyable 7 out of 10 show. So why do people get so worked up over it? Where does all the discourse surrounding it come from? And why does it seem to bring out the worst in literally everyone? Well, I think there are 3 main contributing factors to The Loud House's divisive reputation. First off, there are those who think that The Loud House has gone downhill, with some claiming that its decline occurred as early as Season 3, which I personally don't see. If anything, I'd argue that Seasons 3 and 4 are the show at its best. It was the point where it fully phased out some of its meaner, more problematic aspects, adopted a bit of continuity, and where the show would reach its highest highs without hitting the same lows of the previous seasons. That said, it wasn't until Season 5 when you really started to see fans failing on this show. And let me tell you, from that point forward, The Loud House would become nothing shy of complete, absolute it's fine. It's okay. Yeah, I have to be honest, I really don't agree with the claims that The Loud House has become absolutely terrible. While there has been a decline in quality starting from Season 5, and there's little denying that the show has passed its prime, I personally don't think that the decline's anywhere near as severe as many make it out to be. If anything, I'd say that it went from a 7 to like a 6 out of 10. That said, even if I don't think that The Loud House's decline was super severe, the decline in quality is still very much there. there. Now, why do myself and others think the show isn't quite as good as it used to be? Well, from this point forward, we don't see the Loud siblings work off of each other as a group nearly as much as in previous seasons. While seasons 2 through 4 managed to hit a nice balance between episodes focusing on one of the siblings and ones focusing on the family as a whole, from season 5 onwards, we get way more of the former than the latter. Now granted, I like both types of episodes, it's just that one of the main appeals of the Loud House is seeing these very different siblings bounce off of each other and the chaos that they end up causing. We also don't see Lincoln get paired with one of his sisters as often, with his episodes more often involving him and his friend group, which I'm not a huge fan of. While Clyde is a likable enough character who plays off of Lincoln fairly well, I never found the Clink and McCloud episodes to be nearly as entertaining as the ones with Lincoln and his sisters. As for the rest of his friends, they most definitely exist. I mean, they're not annoying or anything, they're just kind of on the bland side and don't have nearly as fun or memorable of a dynamic when compared to Lincoln and his siblings. Except for Stella, she's kind of cool. Although that's mainly because she shares the same voice actress as Marcy Wu, who at this point is the one thing that motivates me to get out of bed in the morning. Another issue myself and others have with the later Loud House seasons is the more fantastical tone that the series would adopt. Starting out, the Loud House was a relatively grounded show. While it did have its share of cartoon logic, and could get a bit zany with some of Lisa's inventions, or the occasional brief, absurd throwaway gag at the end of an episode, the tone was still fairly grounded. From season 5 onwards though, there will be a good amount of episodes with weirdly fantastical plots that felt woefully out of place in the show's established setting. Like there's this one early season 5 episode, Family Bonding, where Lincoln is convinced that their new neighbors are actually agents working for an evil organization plotting to sabotage Royal Wood's economy by destroying the town's cherry supply, which is absolutely outlandish and leads to Lincoln learning a lesson about not letting his imagination run wild. Oh no, wait, they actually are secret agents and Lincoln has to stop them. I'm sorry, what? How did we get here? While these more fantastical plots only really spring up every now and then, whenever an episode takes an absurd turn, I'm always taken out of the experience and I just find myself kind of mentally checking out. It's not even that these kinds of episodes are completely unwatchable, it's just that this isn't what I came to this show for. I watched The Loud House to see the bond between this chaotic group of siblings who find themselves in pretty relatable, mostly believable situations. So when I see an episode where Lincoln and Clyde have to stop Lisa's robot from actually destroying Royal Woods, I can't help but think to myself, what are we doing? I'm sorry, but you can't just suddenly change the rules and tone of your show's setting in such a drastic way 5 seasons in. However, despite my complaints about the direction the Loud House would take, like I said earlier, I don't think it's anywhere near bad. Yeah, the more fantastical episodes suck, and the show has passed its prime, but I think that the majority of the episodes from season 5 onwards are still at least of okay quality. And unlike a lot of other shows that go through seasonal rot, I don't think that this show's character writing has gotten any worse. I still find the Loud siblings to be super likable, endearing characters. Also, for what it's worth, season 7 so far seems like it's kind of addressing the issues I take with the newer seasons. It's too soon to say whether or not this will be a return to form for the show, but at least there's that. Ultimately, while I more than understand why season 5 was the point where a lot of fans jumped ship, I think that the show's charm still shines through, despite some of the more annoying changes that were made to it. And that was another edition of Seasonal Rot Showcase. What were your thoughts on the Loud House? Do you think that it's seen a decline in quality? Feel free to discuss in the comments below if you like. Stay beautiful, everyone! What? What was that? Wait! Stop the music! I'm sorry, wrong video series. We still have like 7 minutes left. Just hang on, just give me 1 second. Damn it, Sockman, get it together, man! The second reason behind the vitriol against the Loud House comes from its most infamous aspect, the fan base. For the few fortunate souls who don't know, the Loud House is very well known for its, let's just say, peculiar fan base. While a lot of the weird side of the base is perfectly harmless and doesn't do anything beyond making cringy art, there's a vocal minority of sick freaks who make NSFW of the Loud siblings. You know, the children.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Now, unfortunately, this is an issue that almost always occurs whenever a children's work gains a large adult fan base. There's always a sick minority of people within them who insist on being gross about minors. However, this problem is especially bad with the Loud House fanbase. Well, yes, this crap is still just being done by a minority of people. For whatever reason, it's a more prominent issue here than in other kids' cartoon fanbases. I have no idea what it is about this 7 out of 10 slice of life Nicktoon that attracts sickos, but there's a worrying amount of them, and it's sadly the thing that most people associate the Loud House with, leading many to not want anything to do with it. Now, I'm personally of two mindsets here. On the one hand, I think it's perfectly understandable for someone's view on a work to be tainted by a toxic fan base. It's a viewpoint that I can perfectly relate to. The toxic people within Vivziepop's fan base is one of the several reasons why I end up falling out for shows, despite generally enjoying them for what they were. I probably wouldn't have the same level of disdain that I do for the Snyderverse if people in that fan base weren't constantly acting up, and there's a good reason why I stay the hell away from any and all things Star Wars, unless the word Lego is somewhere in the title. So yeah, it's completely okay to not want anything to do with the show because of some of its fans. However, problems start to arise when you start claiming that those toxic fans are reflective of the fanbase in its entirety, as well as the people behind the work. I've seen a number of people sincerely claim that because there's a depressing amount of gross perverts who watch the show, then that must mean the Loud House is written by gross perverts for gross perverts. Granted, Chris Salvino was a massive creep, and despite not being involved in the show past season 2, it's still perfectly reasonable to be uncomfortable watching a show made by a sexual harasser. That said, The Loud House, even at its worst, is a perfectly inoffensive show. Again, the show's early seasons did utilize some problematic 90s and 2000s tropes, but they had the good sense to stop using them as time went on. There isn't really anything to suggest that the people working on this show were trying to sneak perverse things into it. Again, it's understandable that the gross people within the Loud House fanbase would turn you off from the show, but you have to remember that at the end of the day, the gross, toxic people in any given fanbase only represent a vocal minority of fans. The vast majority of people within even the most infamous of fandoms, including the ones I listed earlier, are perfectly chill, normal people, and the Loud House fanbase is no different. Yeah, there are some serious creeps who engage with the show, but that doesn't mean that they represent what the Loud House is. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with making fun of or criticizing the show or its fan base. Just don't generalize everyone who works on and watches the show as creeps because of a sick minority of people. That being said, what the actual fuck is wrong with some of these people? Just the utterly obscene things that they've made these children say and do. Dear God. The final reason why I think the Loud House gets so much heat is simply because a lot of people are just tired of seeing it. If I'm being honest, I think that a good chunk of the former fans' claims that the Loud House has gone straight up bad stems more from franchise fatigue than anything. Just like with SpongeBob, Rugrats, and the Fairly Odd Parents before it, Nickelodeon just can't let a good thing run its course, and insists on milking every successful show it sees for everything it's worth. I mean, yeah, I think The Loud House is a generally good show, but is it good enough to warrant 7 seasons and counting, a spin-off series, a Netflix movie, a live-action movie, and a live-action series based on said movie running concurrently with the main show? Or as we in the cartoon community call it, pulling a reverse Kid Danger? No. No. Even as someone who still enjoys it for what it is, I can't deny that The Loud House probably doesn't still need to be running after more than 7 years. It probably would have been better off ending after 5 seasons, with the movie serving as its last hurrah. It's just really frustrating to me that Nickelodeon's response to The Loud House's surprise success wasn't to give more original IPs a fair chance to find an audience, but to have it take the Fairly Odd Parents' place in their holy trinity of properties that they actually give a crap about, and more or less double down on screwing over original programming, or just anything that doesn't debut with SpongeBob level ratings. Overall, do I think that The Loud House really deserves the heat that it gets online? Not really. While I don't think of it quite as highly as some other fans, I still do enjoy The Loud House for what it is. That said, while I do think some of the criticism it gets is kind of overblown, I can also understand where a lot of the show's critics are coming from. It's a flawed show that I can see not being everyone's cup of tea, and Nickelodeon continuing to milk this IP without giving their non-SpongeBob or Henry Danger programming a fair chance is frustrating. But I do think that there are some people who need to chill out about this show. That also goes goes for the show's fans, because my god, do some people take criticism of the show way too personally. Someone literally attempted to dox Cartoon She because he made a negative video on the Loud House. Because how dare he dislike a children's show that you like? My guy, it's the Loud House. Is an opinion on a kid's cartoon really worth giving someone grief over? Dear god, this is why the show's fanbase gets such a bad rap. Again, the Loud House isn't for everyone. Accept that and move on. All in all, I just think that there are some fans and critics who need to take a step back and remember that it's just a children's cartoon and it's not worth getting upset over. And those were my thoughts on the Loud House and the discourse surrounding it. What do you think about the Loud House? Does it deserve the praise? Does it deserve the backlash? Feel free to discuss in the comments below if you like. Maybe even consider subscribing if you want to hear more of me rambling on about cartoons. With all that said, regardless on how you feel about it, hopefully this video will maybe encourage people on either side of the fence with this show to be just a bit more civil when discussing it. Or it'll invoke the wrath of the show's fans and or critics because civil, discussion, and the Loud House are words that have never been used in the same sentence before. My god, what have I done? Okay, now play the out.